When is the last time you honestly evaluated a moral ethical position you hold and ended up changing that position? At 32 I decided to no longer hate the Turks. I'm Greek and my family was run off their land by the Turks in the 30s. But Turkish people I meet today had nothing to do with that and I just couldn't justify the hate in my mind anymore. I used to think that all drug addicts were degenerate lowlifes. I remember I used to shudder at the sight of them hunched in an alley on my way to school. To me, they were scumbags who couldn't control themselves. This changed a few years ago after I read a pay it forward thread on Reddit that put me in a giving mood. I decided to buy a sandwich from my favorite deli and give it to one of the guys in the alley. There was only one guy there at the time, a 40-something black man. I had passed by him several times but always without interaction, so delivering the sandwich was admittedly a bit awkward at first. Then we sat down on some milk crates and ate our lunch. His name was Hank, and he was impossibly charismatic. He told me things hadn't always been this bad. He used to be an industrial engineer that worked at the airport outside the city. He lost his wife to leukemia and couldn't deal with the pain, so he turned to H to cope. I realized at that moment something that Russell Brand recently articulated very beautifully in an article he wrote. For Hank and presumably many others, drugs are not the problem. Life is the problem, and drugs are his solution. That's what's wrong with him. He is not a piece of crap like I thought he was. He is not a scumbag. He is a man so hurt that he constantly sedates himself to escape from his crappy reality, if just for a moment. I was really anti-homosexuality. I mean really, it disgusted me. I had no respect for them at all. Then my brother came out to me. All of a sudden I had to realize that this person I loved wasn't another person just because he liked the company of other gentlemen. It was still my brother, and I love him to pieces. This reaction is fairly common and is the reason many activists are encouraging adults to come out to their families. Congrats to your brother on being out and to you for accepting him. I used to be 100% career driven, a climber so to speak. All I wanted to do was get up that ladder. So when I went off to college, I set out to give myself the best chance of that possible. Made connections, gained people's trust, worked my butt off, etc. And it was working. Opportunities to get real world experience started cropping up via professors and other acquaintances, and it was pretty good. Then I joined a service organization on campus, and everything changed. I met many people with different lives, and I realized that there is so much more to life than a career. I met homeless people who had lived more fulfilled lives than I ever hoped to, and I met children with more love, laughter and happiness in their future than I would have gotten. I've now realized that strict planning is worthless because you don't know what life is going to offer. So I take it as it comes, rather than sprinting through it at the fastest pace. If you want to be a grocer, or a general, or a politician, or a judge, you will invariably become it. That is your punishment. If you never know what you want to be, if you live what some might call the dynamic life but what I will call the artistic life, if each day you are unsure of who you are and what you know, you will never become anything. And that is your reward. Oscar Wilde. Another poster already said it, but for me it was the death penalty. I am former military, and it always just seemed like justice served. But there is a difference between killing someone who is trying to kill you back, or shooting an intruder in your home, and a death sentence carried out months or years after the commission of the original crime. The more I looked at it, the more macabre it seemed. Used to do tarot readings for people, half serious, half for crap and giggles. Until one day a woman came to me asking for advice on a tough decision. I laid the cards and worked my routine. She broke up in tears after I told her either decision would have negative consequences. Then she told me about her dilemma, her kid with cancer and whether she should go through with a treatment which was equally killing her kid. I told her WTF she was doing and why she would turn to something as silly as tarot cards to tell her what would be best for her kid. I stopped doing tarot and abhor every paranormal method since that people use for whatever means. Frick that crap. I constantly check my moral ethical compass. I don't know enough about anything to be satisfied that I am ever going to always be right. I do this too, and sometimes it makes me feel so ignorant because I can't decide what's right. This Prism leak has made me rethink how much I care about my privacy and everything I do online. At first, I thought nothing of it, but then I read the comment that was on our best of in the video with Sheila Biaf. I'm legitimately peed afraid of what my government is capable of. I see what's going on in Turkey and think, dang, is this what we are going to turn into? We are losing one of our constitutional and human rights because of this. I can't just sit back and not say or think something, or else I will be part of the problem. I'm not sure I necessarily changed position, but there were a lot of things I simply hadn't considered enough to know my stance on, and doing my degree in philosophy and theology really changed that, especially on the distinction between passive and active acting. So, if you let something happen, are you as bad as someone who does something? I think the biggest ones it drew out for me was my stance on drugs. I'd always been very opposed to them, whereas now I'm opposed to misuse of them, rather than just any use of them. It's because of that I really wish philosophy was taught earlier. It teaches you how to form, understand and express moral positions, which is really useful. Well, not me, but my dad. He used to be very anti-gay marriage. My sister-in-law's mom is a lesbian, and my dad began spending time with her and her partner. He came to realize they were real people who liked things like shooting guns and playing poker, just like him. The last time I saw him before he passed away unexpectedly, I asked him, so now that you know Syl's moms, do you really think they don't deserve the same right to marry that you have? He paused and said, I do think they should have the same right to get married. I've never been more proud of anyone in my life. I miss my dad, and I'm so glad we had that conversation before he died. Drone strikes, Guantanamo, and generally the whole war on terror. When I was a freshman, I woke up early to see the invasion of Baghdad. Little did I know I would end up enlisting and being there myself from 0910. From my military experience, I supported all of these. Well, maybe not Guantanamo completely, yet I didn't disapprove of it. I left the army after 5.5 years and now in college. I'm so thankful that I've actually sat down and researched the subjects. I find drone warfare ineffective, immoral, and basically illegal. Guantanamo is a black stain on our history. There were so many illegal practices there and absurd policies. I don't know how it's still open. I also think that the entire war on terror is a sham. Yes, there are terrible people out there. I'm not saying there are not. But the way we go about in combating this is wrong and making us stray from our moral compasses. I don't regret my choice in serving my country, but I regret that I wasn't aware of the gigantic facade the whole war on terror was, so I could at least look at it from a different perspective while contributing to it. A few years ago, I used to think that girls who dressed more provocatively were more likely to be assaulted simply because they showed more skin. I hesitated to say that they were asking for it, but there was a small voice in the back of my head whispering, if you know that a miniskirt is going to garner unwanted attention, you shouldn't wear it. Then I was sexually assaulted. I was at a summer party, wearing shorts and a t-shirt. I realized that wanting to look nice, even to impress the opposite sex, does not justify or warrant aggressive behavior, and that assault doesn't just happen to girls in miniskirts. I wasn't asking for it, and no one does. There was a point where I rationalized being gay as completely acceptable but was strongly against gay adoption. I did research on the topic and the evidence I had found pointed out that children need role models of both sexes in their life, and same-sex couples couldn't provide that. After a long debate with some friends, they pointed out a lot of flaws in my arguments. I left unchanged, but now with more desire for research. My original intent was to prove to them that they were wrong with evidence. After a night, I started to realize I was wrong. Not only was I wrong, I was ridiculously wrong. Children of gay parents typically excel because they actually want a child to love and raise. Now I'm completely for gay adoption. Check better the sources of the investigations you read. It's not that unusual you find that certain investigations were funded by organizations with specific bias. I'm an 18-year-old female who is very shy and awkward. I used to shame and laugh at girls who were sexually liberated or promiscuous. But as I grew older, I realized that if these women are being safe, responsible, and aren't hurting anyone, why should I judge them for partaking in something that makes you feel good? It doesn't concern me or my life, so I began being very pro-S, despite not engaging in the behavior myself. I was very unkind to lesbian folk in my younger days. Typical macho gay bashing crap, mainly parroting what my bigoted father used to say. I wish I could take it all back. Nuclear power. My parents are ex-hippies. Well, I guess technically they are still hippies, and were vehemently anti-nuclear, attending various festivals, protests and demonstrations, and actually being a part of having a planned power station not be built. There's actually a wind farm on that site now. I spent my whole life thinking nuclear power was dirty and dangerous and living in fear of a nuclear power plant accident. I now realize that as long as the plant is properly designed and not manned by irresponsible, drunk Russians and not built in an area of high tectonic tsunami activity. Seriously, don't do this. It's probably the safest, cleanest form of power and something we really need, although I'm still a huge believer in so-called alternative energy sources such as wind or solar. Now I just think we should shut down all the coal oil-fired power plants. My parents agree with me too. Hey, drunk Russians make incredible nuclear engineers. I was the happy little child when I was younger and had the whole view on I don't understand why people can't kill themselves. Can't they just grow up and be happy? It stayed like this for a while. I just couldn't understand it until I saw a documentary about suicide, and this one boy about 15 years of age, my age, was talking about his life and his pains, and he started to cry on TV, and I just felt really bad that I was judging people like him that I knew nothing about. People crying really make me depressed. And so I changed my views. Also, my current boyfriend told me he used to cut himself, and once it's someone close to you, it really gets in deep in your head about how bad your opinion is, and how you need to change. Universal healthcare. I used to believe that it was every American's responsibility to take care of themselves. I still believe that, very strongly. However, I now believe that there are some things a modern progressive society should provide its citizens, and I believe basic healthcare is one of those things. Now, not to politicize, but making you buy healthcare is not the same as providing a basic level of healthcare to all citizens either, but hey. I was very conservative about everything till I was in my mid-teens. Alcohol was morally wrong, and heck hath all its fury reserved for those who touched beer. God forbid you'd wear a dress or shorts in front of me, I'd judge you harshly. It was okay if you were friends with guys, but if you had loads of guy friends, you were a mess. Being in a relationship so young was wrong. And going to the club disco was again blasphemy. Women are idiots to wax, shave, get hair removed. They do it just for men and to look fancy. Why did I have these notions? I grew up in a fairly conservative city with fairly conservative parents. This city was on the fast track to becoming a bigger, better one with an influx of new people, and so anyone outside the mold was criticized thusly. I wanted to wear traditional outfits, not Western wear, for after I grew up and got married it was that bad. It would be safe to say lots of people thought in a similar manner. What changed my opinion? I always had the books and the newspaper. The internet helped me find great people, read great stories, and discover TV series, and discovered more knowledge than ever. So I decided, it's not bad to have any of the things above. People should be free to do what they want as long as they don't hurt anyone else in the process and are doing something legal-ish. I drink, dance, wear Western clothes, and talk to a lot of guys freely. And yeah, I feel good when I painfully hold back tears as my hairs are ripped out, cause it makes me feel better about how I look. People can change. This whole circumcision thing that Reddit has opened me up to. I'm American and pretty much everyone is cut, but Reddit keeps on pointing out that there's no good reason for it except for aesthetics. And now I'm all torn up. If I have a son one day, I don't know what I'll do, and I don't know why it bothers me so much. I think it bothers me that illogically, I just want him to look normal, even though I now know that I'm being stupid. In Europe, uncut is the normal look, if it helps. I used to be very pro-war. I wanted to flex our military's muscle every chance we got, and thought that with enough demonstrations of power, no one would ever frick with us. Then I read about the constitutional proposal to add all engagements in war should come before the country as a vote. If you vote yes to go to war, you are then required to sign up for the draft, and that really hit me. I was playing with pawns when I really put myself in that state of mind and realized that not only does war mean the death of those on the other side, but on my side as well, and with kids practically. I changed my decision. And though reading and research, There are many instances where war was avoided and the conflict was resolved much more peacefully. I am now anti-war, and in case it wasn't obvious, I am a male living in the American South. I'm an old sucker, 53, and the longer I live, the grayer everything gets. When I was younger, there were more absolutes, more definite black and whites. Not so much anymore. I've become a lot more open-minded, a lot more accepting, a lot less likely to jump to conclusions. Life is not that simple. I used to be a pretty hardcore libertarian, but I've recently reevaluated whether that really makes sense in the modern world. There's a lot about government control I still hate, but pure capitalism seems like it makes less and less sense as time goes on. I agree. This is why I think being either a libertarian-leaning Republican or Democrat makes a lot of sense. We don't need to scrap the entire government. We just need to value the rights of the individual and stop this oppressive streak in our modern government before it gets ugly. I've been struggling through an issue for the past several years and still can't bring my brain cells to consensus. I'm pretty liberal in most things, but I'm struggling with gun control. I, personally, don't like guns. I'm not a fan of the gun culture, and I'm well aware that I'm using a far too sweeping generalization there, and I think we are far too violent. But I also agree that, for the majority of people who use guns in a destructive manner, gun laws control won't do a dang thing. It's just one, or more, laws that they'll be more than willing to break. I also believe that guns as self-defense is just not a very workable idea. I remember a few years back, after the Vartek shootings, 20/20 did a trial where they had a classroom full of trained and armed policemen, and how they reacted to a gunman entering the class. They overwhelmingly failed, and killed far more civilians than were originally killed, if I recall correctly. I also keep in mind this swath of morons who I know who use the self-defense argument, and I'd not trust them to defend me, armed or unarmed, for anything. So I struggle. I want less guns, not more. I want solutions based on psychology, brains, and rational thought rather than brute force. But I don't want to penalize those people who live their guns and use them safely, when criminals will have guns, regardless. I used to be sort of apathetic about the fur trade. We kill animals for meat, why not for fashion? But someone sent me a video once that showed a critter that had been skinned alive for its fur, and it just sat there dying in a pile of carcasses. I have never been able to forget it, nor could I ever buy something with fur without being 100% sure it came from an animal that was killed humanely. And I know it doesn't make sense that I still eat meat, knowing how much inhumane treatment is in the meat industry. I guess it's just knowing how much easier it is to give up something that just has an aesthetic appeal versus something that tastes delicious. I'm really looking forward to developments in artificially grown meat. Mark my words. One day the world will declare that the practices of factory farming were unquestionably morally wrong and utterly barbaric, and it will do so through a mouthful of artificial chicken. Vegetarianism. I thought that people were stupid not to eat meat. We are the strongest. We can eat weaker species. There is nothing wrong with that. I am now more aware of vegetarians' concerns, and I don't judge them anymore. I used to think rodeo was okay. After all, they are only doing what ranchers would need to do during the course of a day's work, right? Then I read about some of the behind the scenes things they do to get the animals to behave the way they want them to behave to be entertaining. I also read about the injuries and deaths of animals that go unreported. So now I no longer watch on TV and certainly won't attend a live rodeo. I used to be a big online piracy advocate, especially just after high school. Try before you buy was my rallying cry, though I would hardly ever buy, and I would use my meager entertainment budget to further justify my ends. I would get really into finding good torrents of music and movies, sometimes a game or two if I was feeling bold. This all changed when a good buddy of mine got accepted into USC to study to become a game designer. We will call him Greg. Greg was always an inspiration to me, was my DM back when my gang back in my hometown played D&D and hosted lots of fun parties and was a very amiable dude. I respect his opinion on most things. As he is taking classes he starts posting propaganda advocating against piracy, in the form of taking away from artists and developers Turns out a lot of them aren't on a salary and actually depend on the sales to pay their bills. All those indie games that I love to play and pirate, turns out some of those developers are small enough companies that they actually rely on these sales just to stay afloat as a business and aren't a monstrosity like EA or Sony that could absorb a few pirated copies. This really hit home with me, and I got the message loud and clear. I started asking myself, why was I pirating games in the first place? To be cool and hip, to stay current with the latest games available. Suddenly I couldn't justify it anymore. Not for new games, not for new music, not for anything. I am still a big advocate of file sharing and internet neutrality and all that jazz, don't get me wrong. However, I've learned to appreciate a lot more what I have, going back and replaying the stuff I already have, and savor the times when I am actually able to afford getting something new. I don't expect anyone around me to have the same wake-up call that I did, and I don't go around and smack my friends around with my newfound morals, but I feel a lot better about the digital media that I own, and that's what matters. I went through a lot of changes in my early 20s as I slowly let go of my religiously held beliefs. Used to be a raging homophobe, never violent, but hated gays. Thought they were all sinful and gross. Extremely misogynistic. Held with the strong traditional religious belief that women are to support their man. That it is honorable to be strong for your woman. All that crap. Finally at 27, I had a long thoughtful look at my religious belief entirely and realized it wasn't true. I woke up the next morning a non-believer. More recently, GMOs. I was caught up in the anti-science left about the dangers of genetically modified foods. Then I learned to separate my disdain for the corporate policies of some of the companies that develop GMOs from the products themselves. We could effectively end world hunger, help save millions of starving people. Oppose the corporations all you want, but GMOs do more good than harm. This is going to sound too silly to be true, but every day I flip-flop on at least something. There's always a new context, a new scenario that challenges any number of ethical standpoints. Whether it's how I feel about others while driving or a certain course of action I may not take, there is always a moment of debate. I'm very firm in most of my deeper philosophical understandings, but it would be foolish of me to not consider, and then potentially adopt, alternatives to my way of thinking. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.